Anybody who's been in the field for any amount of time would know that a lot of the time for data scientists goes in the
If there's a data breach, what do? Like, do you have procedures for that? So it's quite involved, and it depends from
phrase or two. What is the key differences between data governance and AI governance? Spoken about large language models in the context of financial sectors like banks. Have they really adopted these generative AI models?
when you come up with ideas for something, that comes from a human being. That comes from inspiration. That comes from creativity. There's something ephemeral that we can't really put our finger onto.
If there are two graduates, one knows how to use that tool and the other doesn't. Obviously, the guy using the AI tool will have a bigger edge over the other person.
This concern for what AI is going to do also has a dark side to it.
For today's episode, I'm thrilled to introduce an exceptional leader in the field of AI and data strategy, Sheeraz. With over 20 years of experience transforming the banking industry, Sheeraz has spearheaded some amazing groundbreaking initiatives in the AI integration and data governance field. Most notably, he is the former Chief Data Officer at HSBC Global Banking and Markets. He is now the founder of Odin Mind Inc, where he continues to help organizations leverage the power of AI. Welcome to the podcast, Sheeraz.
Adnan, pleasure to be here.
So, how have you been, Sheeraz?
I've been busy. A lot of
I've been busy, I'm sure. Setting up your own work and work, and we'll get towards that. But first, Shiraz, I want to know about your data and AI journey. What led you into this AI industry, and how have you been progressing throughout your AI career?
Well, let me take you way back. When I was about 10 years old, I got my first computer, which was the Atari 130 XC with a whopping 128 kilobytes of memory. And that was the first time that I had interacted with a computer. I bought the computer because I want to play video games, but when I was flipping through the manual, there was this interesting language in the back called BASIC. And so I wrote some of the code into the computer, and it was creating programs. So it created a calculator, I created a picture, I created music, and it made me realize that I was able to create things with the power of this computer. And it really catched my imagination. I think it really spearheaded my way forward in connecting with coding and analysis that I did on. So fast forward, I thought I was going to get into software development, engineering, but unfortunately my math grades weren't that great. So I did get into business management, information technology management at Ryerson, and I picked up database systems. So database was very popular over there. So one of my positions was a co-op position and required access creating a database. So I used normalization theory, and I was like, wow, this theory actually works. And I was able to build queries, which helped me gain insight into some of the systems that they were working with. So they were building a QA system for this large scale project. And, when I kind of reflect back on why these things attracted me, what was so compelling, because I've always been a fan of human wisdom and insight. So there's different ways of approaching wisdom. There's philosophy, which is your traditional a priori reasoning of wisdom. There's economic theory. There's psychology, which looks at human behavior. And then something that really connected with me was data science. And data science looks into human insight, but I would argue it's the best way to get human insight because it can't lie. Data doesn't lie. You can make up stories to your therapist. You can make up, ideas and thoughts. But when you're actually working with real data, with behavioral data, then you get true insight into people's behavior. And that's how many of the businesses are driven these days, through data-driven insights. So that was kind of where I got from where I was to where I am. I've had a 20-year career working in mainly in Canadian banks. So I've worked in data analytics, data science, data governance, and after doing all of that, ended up with a leadership role at HSBC. So my two highlights would be Capital One and also HSBC, where I gained like the majority of my skills in terms of coding and analytics and data governance.
Wow, amazing. So I can't believe it that it goes so back, and then your motivation at 10 years old. I don't even remember what I was doing at 10 years old. So pretty fascinating. But I do agree that, data gives you insights that normally, even if, for example, I was never in favor of questionnaires. For example, when we used to go to universities, they used to have surveys, a questionnaire before the course and a questionnaire after the course, and then always those scales between 1 to 5. I would always hit the moderate one, 3, 3, 3, 3 for everything. And I feel like, you can never gather such kind of information from people themselves, but when you look at their patterns, their behaviors, like you said, we can gather so much information. The way I spend my day, based on that, companies can, tailor make an entire marketing campaign on that. And that's what fascinated me as well, the data science part. Let's dig a bit more on the data part. Do
Mhm.
you think that data is always representative of the real world? I mean, there is also a lot of noise as well, right? So, and you should know what to capture and how to capture. That's why we say that garbage in, garbage out. An AI model that has useless data will not work. So, how do we make the classification? What kind of data is useful and what kind of data is noise, garbage? No
Well,
need
I
to
think
spend time on that.
sure. So I think that really points to why it's important to have proper data governance, and why it's important to know your key data sources, how they're curated, how do they flow from system to system, and um, have appropriate data quality measures in place and controls to ensure that the data that's being provided is of good nature. So, if you look at traditional database systems, you have um, you have a number of disparate systems that talk to each other. They could be first party within the company, they could be third party, and really what it's about is enhancing trust and credibility with data. So that requires a lot of work, building a proper infrastructure, ensuring that you have the appropriate data controls. So from data governance perspective, that would be data lineage, which is basically the connection between various data systems, how data flows from basically the producer of the data to the end user. And the end user could be your report, your dashboard, or your ML, or machine learning, AI, that sort of stuff. And then there's also the ability to measure those things on a consistent basis. So that measurement is really important. It's probably really understated because all these things sort of that we talk about AI and these cool dashboards and reports and all that amazing stuff. None of that can exist without a proper data infrastructure and, more importantly, the proper data quality. So having that practice in place is really important. There's a data architecture called data fabric. It's supposed to be solve everything. AI and ML is going to solve all the data quality problems. Well, garbage in, garbage out, like you said. If the underlying data is not of good quality, then anything downstream, whether it's like data fabric with data virtualization, um, that 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 becomes ineffective.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I totally agree with you. Many people want to dive right into the model, don't spend enough time looking at the data and preparing the data.
Yeah.
But anybody who's been in the field for any amount of time would know that a lot of the time for data scientists goes in the data preparation and pre-processing, and then
Yeah.
machine learning or model building comes way after that. So you're right. Governance is a key part, and you've been working a lot in Canadian banks. So would you like tell us which regulatory bodies govern or have compliances that we have to fulfill with regards to data governance? I know GDPR is a very famous one. Are there any other ones that are very important?
So GDPR is a UK-based one. There is a Canadian legislation that's going to be tabled that is going to incorporate GDPR. So more companies that can incorporate those type of data controls, um, is a wise thing to do. I'd say the regulatory bodies within Canada are FinTrack, which looks at financial transactions. There's OSFI, and there's another one I can't remember off the top of my head. And those regulatory bodies have specific rules about the quality of the data. For example, accurate information for names, addresses. They look at, and I'm just talking about banks, transaction monitoring, all that has to be of sound data quality, and you have to have proof that you have an apparatus that's designed around it. So, do you have proper data quality reporting? Do you have good metadata? Do you have good data lineage? Do you have good documentation? Do you have responsible people within the organization who are accountable if the data is incorrect? And you have a RACI in terms of that. Then you have to go into also privacy control. So, are you protecting the privacy of your customers? Um, if there's a data breach, what do you do? Like, do you have procedures for that? So it's quite involved, and it depends from regulator to regulator what they need. So that's just looking at Canadian regulation. We also have the international bodies. So banks such as HSBC, for example, have to incorporate GDPR. They have to also include a lot of regulations from Basel. So BCBS 239 is another one of those.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Got it. So I think I'm assuming that you're talking about the data that is running through the banks and their databases, but also when we talk about machine learning, we do something called feature engineering, where we take the existing data and create new features out of that. Are these also governed in industries? These new features that are created by machine learning models?
Not to that level of granularity, but there are general guidelines and rules of having data quality. They want to make sure that the information just downstream of data is accurate. So it is up to basically the individual companies to incorporate specific rules to improve features. I would suspect in the
Yeah.
future it's probably going to become more prevalent,
Yes.
where they will ask for specifics. But like for
Because
example, yeah, go ahead.
I have worked with some clients where they created feature stores specifically for features that are used by ML models, and then, of course, at that time, governance was not such a big thing, and but I'm sure that right now, like, everybody has to even govern these features, because these are the features that are also being used to lead the predictions in the machine learning models. And
Yeah.
if these features are not maintained and governed, then again, your model can drift and your predictions can be off.
Yeah, I think we have to look at it sort of in a tiered model. So look at it when you look at a typical machine learning model, whether you're talking about your regular random forest to something that's deep learning, that sort of stuff. You have input, you have the process, and you have the output. So input, you have to ensure that that data that you're getting is of good quality. The problem is a lot of companies don't even have the practices in place to ensure good data quality. From a large language model perspective, that means you have to not only just have good data, but also remove bias. So your data
Yes.
sources have to be of good and sound nature as well. So all that has to be done sort of at the beginning, the process of the training. Now it depends what type of model you're using. If you're using an unsupervised model, for example, it's kind of a black box. You really don't know how the relationships work between the various features and variables. But there are other statistical methods that you can provide more transparency on it. And then there's the output, which is sort of the feedback mechanism. So your model validation. You look at also stuff where in large language models you have the reinforced human learning. So you have people look at various samples to see whether that quality of that data is there as well. So I think having that sort of process is one thing. Documentation really important at every step of the way. In larger, more complicated companies, you also have very model governance. So you have steering committees, for example, that provide information on what is the input, what is the process, what is the output, and they do maybe quarterly checks or monthly checks to indicate where things have been in terms of um, deviations from standard norms with regards to results. So I think that model governance, model management is really important, especially if we're working with very complex models.
And I think we have already touched upon this, but I wanted to ask you, if you wanted to say it in a phrase or two, what is the key differences between data governance and AI governance?
Well, I would say AI governance is a subset of data governance. Data governance is about security policies. It's about enhancing trust with data, and data could be, downstream from AI management. Where AI management becomes possible, and I want to also define terms because I think people just kind of run wild with it. AI is an umbrella term for a series of different technologies that use basically machine intelligence to mimic human reasoning. So at the highest level, you've got the sort of machine learning, deep learning, and then you have these sort of generative models. So what applies is what I talked about earlier about the input, process, output, and the proper model governance, documentation, that sort of stuff. With large language models, there's also that extra um, checks that you have to do, controls. If you're working with large language models, you should probably ground your data. So retrieval augmented generation is sort of that new paradigm we're looking at, so that large language models don't go off track. And if you ask a customer chatbot about dinosaurs, it should tell you, "I have no idea what you're talking about," as opposed to doing what it's supposed to be doing.
And in the context, because we have spoken about large language models in the context of financial sectors like banks, have they really adopted these generative AI models?
Not to the extent they are. There is some adoption slowly happening, but I think they're doing it at a slower pace because you have to understand banks. A lot of the data governance is not there from what
Hmm.
the quality of the data is not there. So that creates one problem. The other thing is most banks are very risk averse, and they want to avoid any type of reputational, legal, or financial impact to
Yes.
the company. So they don't want to put a chatbot that says something that it shouldn't, or they don't want to implement tools in that. But um, I would say you're seeing a slow adoption to that. So a lot of banks are introducing open source models like Llama 3, so that so for example, I understand that Goldman Sachs has implemented it. There's a few other companies that are
Yes.
implementing these sort of open source models to basically basically improve the productivity. Um, I think where you'll probably see it is like sort of low hanging fruit. So like
Yeah.
contact center information, coding and development, content management, especially for internal stuff. That's something that can easily be implemented, which
Yes.
can help improve the productivity. Um, I do think that there's this notion that you can somehow automate everything, and I don't think that's realistic or responsible because you need a human in the loop to assess the information that's being generated through these systems. And
Yes.
if you break down a typical workflow or process, there are parts that can be automated, like summarizing, comprehension, parsing information. Those things are kind of like easy for AI to do. But when it comes to like reasoning, or for example, if you're a project manager and you're trying to negotiate resources or budget, your AI is not going to help you with that. Like you can't persuade people using AI.
Yeah.
So there is
Yeah.
that human component, and I think some of the hype around job losses and stuff is kind of overblown, in my opinion.
Overblown. Yeah. I mean, I think you've struck the balance there. There is absolutely a lot of potential for AI to automate stuff. And then again, that does not mean that there will be no human required. On the contrary, human expertise would be the driving force behind all of these systems and applications.
Yeah.
And then one more thing I wanted to know is like, what is the reason that generative AI, because AI has been around for quite some time, we have worked upon regression models even in university days. But what is the reason that generative AI really put AI on the map?
Well, I think it's the first time we've been able to automate unstructured data. So in the past, traditionally, we've had spreadsheets. You can think of that as a database, and you have each of the tabs that are kind of like your tables, and they contain numeric data and some categorical data. And was some fairly good coding, you can get around analyzing it, summarizing it, putting it into different forms. When you're working with unstructured data, when you look at stuff like text, video, audio, programmatically, it's really hard to try to manipulate that in some way or get an analysis from it. So with these generative AI models, and there's different modalities, obviously, like I mentioned, text, video, there's 3D game assets, there's image. We can now use various examples to build these technologies. And that now has given us the ability to carry out tasks that we would do as human beings. So if you're working with text, you can summarize information, you can create bullet points from it, you can create full presentations, write ups, all that sort of stuff. You can generate images for, let's say, content creation. You can use Suno, for example, to create songs if you want. So it wasn't possible to do any of this stuff before, and I think that's where it's become quite remarkable, is that it can carry out sort of human-based tasks that were previously not possible.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think because and also, like earlier, you needed a certain skill set to operate these AI models.
Yeah.
Now it has become, democratized the AI. Everybody can use it themselves. Everybody's become an expert of AI using it, prompt engineering and stuff. So okay, so let's move on with what Sam Altman and his vision of AI is, that everything is going to go towards AGI. So I
Yeah.
want you to quickly define, what does AGI mean to you, and what do you think about its AGI and the future of AI?
So AI is typically broken up into two concepts: narrow AI and then there's AGI. So narrow AI is basically defined on a similar, like a simple set of tasks. So ChatGPT, for example, is primarily text based. Well, you could say that's multimodal. Or you have Midjourney, which does image tasks. So they're narrow in the fact that they're defined to one or few tasks. They do not have generalized human capabilities. AGI is kind of like your scary Skynet, where where it has the ability to think as a human being would think, ability to reason, ability to respond to things. So not only can it do all the text-based stuff, it can do image, it can do video. It's essentially almost a godlike entity in its ability to basically create generalized intelligence over a variety of tasks, and such that it exceeds the ability that humans are able to do it.
And do you think this is all science fiction, or do you think it could be possible?
I'm highly skeptical about
Mm,
these systems doing that. But there's a number of reasons. One is, I think we're going to hit an inflection point with the amount of information that we're getting to train these models. So the AI is only as smart as the data that it's being fed. And the way things are going, the internet is going to turn into one large training data set, because AI is just populating everything. So without new data, without new information, that model can't grow beyond its capacity. And it's done reasoning, but there's also like a creative component to it. So when you come up with ideas for something, that comes from a human being. That comes from inspiration. That comes from creativity. There's something ephemeral that we can't really put our finger on to try to replicate that into the system. I mean, it can emulate it, but it can't really solve problems in a novel fashion. So, for example, um, uh, one problem that you can pose is an elevator is running slow and people are complaining, and we need a solution to fix this. So you feed this information to the AI and say, what would you suggest? So I would say, well, work on maintenance schedules, improve elevator thing, provide feedback, all that sort of. Those are just general ideas, but a creative idea, and one that has been implemented, is you put mirrors and music in hallways, because when people are distracted, they don't notice how long things are taking. But that intuitive leap, that creative leap to think of that idea, is not something is not something that AI can just kind of like magically come up with. It requires sort of human understanding. And the other thing you have to realize is these systems are living in boxes. They don't experience things the way we do in an experiential way, touching things. We can't. we can't go to Costa Rica and see a beautiful rainbow or sunset, or travel all over the world to understand that sort of experiential nature, the phenomenology, you could say.
Yeah, I mean, all good points. And in fact, this reminded me of a video I recently saw of a marketing expert, and he was like, uh, Euro was going to spend 6 billion euros on the Euro rail that runs between Europe and two countries. And their mission was to make it faster, and they were going to make it a 2 hour journey into 1 hour and some few minutes. And he was like, instead of spending 6 billions on that, why don't you spend a fraction of that and just give Wi-Fi? And when people have Wi-Fi, they don't really care whether it's 1 hour 30
Yeah,
minutes or a 2 hour train, right?
yeah,
Just like your example. And maybe if we were to ask AI about these things, it would always give us those general recommendations that cut the trip time and do this and do that, and better planning and optimization and stuff like that.
right. And,
And that's because that's what it's good at.
and even when you ask it, give me a novel, out of the box solution that has never been thought of, and you could put all these like prompting techniques and stuff like that, it will still give you generalized
Yes,
answers. If you ask it,
yes.
I want to make $1 million in 3 months, it's going to give you the same sort of advice that you would expect, like invest or, start a business and that sort of stuff. It will not go beyond the confines of its
So
training.
it's basically it's bound by its training data, right?
Right.
So whatever it hasn't seen, it cannot tell you. And even in one of the problems that this generative AI was facing was that it was out of date. It
Yeah.
was trained only till 2022 year, September
Yes, that's right.
2022, and it didn't have recent information. And then one of the techniques, and you can speak about other techniques as well, like how can people get around these problems with AI, generative AI, hallucination, out of date, these kind of problems.
Well, like I mentioned, there's something about using grounding data. So you can see that with companies like Perplexity, for example. So Perplexity is a AI search engine, and it grounds data with internet information. And I assume they do some curation and controls in the back. So it looks at data that's already available on the internet. It looks at white papers. It looks at books and that sort of stuff. So that's kind of like at a public level. And there's also, again, RAG solutions that use grounding data within information. So if you're doing a research paper, for example, you can put all your documents and books and ebooks in one spot, and then you can get a RAG system. You can get one like Olama is one that's very popular with Anywhere LLM, I think it's called, front end. You just upload your information and you're able to. Um,
It provides the context window, and then it can ask you based on that. Yeah. I think like still the generative AI, even though it might not be up to date, for example, you have an out of date generative AI model, but it still has that understanding of language and semantics and syntax and all that stuff. So which, and that's how they use RAG. That based on this, answer me like. And I think a very good example somebody gave was that if there's an English teacher and she hasn't read a book, then what you do is you give her a passage of the book and say, okay, what is the answer based on this passage? So the teacher uses her skills and techniques and answers you, and that's what a generative AI model would do as well.
well,
So
the only difference is that the teacher is humble enough to say, "I don't know," whereas the LLM
exactly.
will give you any answer if it doesn't understand it.
Yes, yes, exactly. And so let's move on towards your journey as well, right? So you've worked a lot in banks and financial sectors, and you have reached your high level positions and all. What made you decide to move into your own business, and what is the driving force behind that?
Well, it's something I've always wanted to do. I've been in the corporate field for about 20 years, and I think I've built enough knowledge and experience that I think I can kind of go on my own way and try to figure out what I want to do. Also, I've been kind of typecast into working banks, so I wanted to work with
Mm.
companies of all different sizes, small and medium-sized businesses. I've worked with a few startups. I've had the opportunity to work with numerous companies all across the world. So it really gives me sort of flexibility and knowledge in sort of other areas that I wasn't that aware of, and it gives you
Yeah.
more insight into how people are using AI and data and all that stuff.
All right. So tell us about this name Odin, and also tell us about your services. What all services do you provide through your company?
Well, I don't know. Odin is the All Father, the god of the god of
Greek
Thor.
mythology. Yeah.
Yeah, from Norse
No,
mythology.
sorry, on North. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I just thought Odin in mind. Thought I'd put those two together. There's no big backstory or anything.
Okay. Okay.
In terms of the services that our company provides is primarily data and AI strategy. So companies want to know how to implement a data practice in their company. They want to know how to build sort of their infrastructure. They want to know what is the best way they can effectively use data. So every company is different. Some companies are interested in monetizing their data. So we look at internal and external monetization. Other companies uh, need more help in terms of data literacy. Other companies need kind of the whole gamut of things. So the data part really fits into data science, data engineering, and data governance. So every company is different. On the AI strategy side, so AI I'm kind of using to talk about generative AI and those type of technologies. So that's primarily around automating processes. So improving operational effectiveness using tools like AI. So not just generalized tools like ChatGPT and Claude, for example, but also looking at specific separate generative AI tools that are out there. Like, for example, Cresta AI is a tool used for AI contact centers to improve sort of onboarding and coaching for internal call center staff. There's companies like Viable that look at net promoter score data. So depending on what the company needs, um, we cater our services to provide those types of services. And yeah,
So you spoke about strategies, right? So I want to know more about strategies. I know every company out there doesn't want to be, falling behind in the AI race. So what mistakes do you think companies make when they want to adopt AI, but they are strategic mistakes that they make when trying to adopt AI?
well, I think there has to be a strong connection between the AI system or a solution, I should say, and what the core objectives of the company is. So there's a lot of hype about AI. I think a lot of companies are under the impression that it's some type of magic wand. You just come in, wave, and everything is going to be fine. And that's not necessarily the reason. That's not necessarily what's going to happen. So you have to know what your core goals are. So core goals could be profitability, growth. It could be at automating stuff. So you have to look at what those objectives are. What are the KPIs? What are the metrics that you want to improve? That's really important. And these technologies have to solve a real problem that's within the company. Do we want to improve customer experience? Do we want to reduce workaround time? Do we want to improve data quality? Like, those are some key questions we need to ask. And I think it's a lot of education in terms of what AI can't do. The other thing is AI again is a large term that we're using. If you're talking about purely analytics and solving those type of problems, I would say about 80-90% of the problems can be solved with general data analytics, data science. You don't need that level of granular detail. Machine learning, deep learning, all these technologies, they're designed to solve more complex problems. And so that's like one factor. The other factor is you have to have a lot of good data in order to build machine learning models. Now, again, going back to the problem of data quality, like garbage in, garbage out, if your data quality and data governance is not there, then you're going to run into problems. Now, there are ways around that, like you can use synthetic data, for example, so you can use a composite of good data and then use that to build your machine learning models. But again, is do you even have that? I think those are some like sort of critical questions you need to ask before you start implementing AI on mass. So it's like a lot of it's education, and it has to be grounded in some type of real problem the company is trying to solve, not just because it sounds cool.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I've worked with a few companies where they say they want to use AI, and under the need they are just using data analytics and data science and
Yeah,
even BI stuff, right? So I felt like, okay, it's just like a bumper sticker that everybody wants to put on their cars, but in reality, they're not even using AI. And like you said, it's not about using or not using, it's about the business case. Many a times the business problems do not require these heavy cannons. It's just a small problem to solve.
Yeah.
And then, so these large companies, right, and especially I'm talking about both kind of companies, those who are developing AI, for example, open AI and other companies, and also those who are system integrators like Microsoft and these companies. What role do you think they play in regulating this AI, making sure that it's safe to use?
They are playing a very big role, and I think that's also a problem as well, because what's happening is that if you if you read history, you look at the finance industry, banking, you look at the energy industry, they started off as a separate of disparate companies that were kind of very close to the customer. They understood what the problems were, but what happens over a period of time is they coalesce and they become more powerful, and so they start forming oligopolies and they start having like larger and larger amounts of control. So all these regulatory bodies that are being created and stuff like that, this like this concern for what AI is going to do also has a dark side to it in the sense that they want to grab a certain level of power. Sam Altman didn't go in front of U.S. Congress concerned about AI just for the sole fact that he was worried about the safety of the citizenry and the people and how he was going to use. He wanted to be the ones that set the stage, made the rules. So if you look at the top companies that are part of in the U.S., there's a council, I forget the name of it, but it's Adobe, Microsoft, NVIDIA, OpenAI, and they're setting the rules how any other new incumbents will come in. So they can draft specific rules and regulations or provide suggestions that will then be enacted for other people who are trying to get into that field to be kind of blocked out. So they're not necessarily doing it for sake of innovation. And so it's a lot of it has to do with sort of making the rules and making sure that they're kind of pushing the agenda. So there's like that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect is the legislative side. So from a government perspective, well, this new technology is coming out. We have to create all these regulations. We have to create compliance. What does that mean? More jobs. We're more relevant. We can charge fines. And that is going to spawn into a bunch of other types of jobs that are going to come, like in terms of lawyers and compliance and bureaucrats and so forth. So that, that's another part of it that needs to be considered.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's why it's not. I think Meta is doing a great job by open sourcing a lot of these models, and at least there is one big player who's moving towards the open source path, other than the other guys. So now let's come down from an enterprise level to an individual level. So you have worked a lot in the financial sector, and many people ask me as well. For example, I knew a guy who helped me get one of these roles earlier, and then later on he reached out to me that even in recruitment, he was a recruiter. He was saying that even in recruitment, there is this fear that AI is going to take our jobs, and I'm sure that this fear is now prevalent across industries. So if there is someone in the financial sector and they feel, for example, I had a friend whose day in day out work is to make predictions and forecasts and stuff, and he's like, this is core work of AI, they can easily take my job. So what would your advice be towards people who are in the financial sector and concerned about AI? What should their let's say next 5-year plan should be?
I think they should embrace the technologies, really try to understand and use them as tools, see them as tools rather than something that's going to like take over your job. So I think getting familiar with, and I think people have to probably broaden their skill set. They'll have to probably work and do understand how these systems work. Like ChatGPT, for example, has a built-in data analysis system. It's important to know that, but it's also important to know sort of the underlying knowledge, how to do data analysis, how to do data science, and then use that to basically conduct reports and analysis and that sort of stuff more effectively by leveraging these tools, as opposed to think that they're going to take over your job. So definitely upskilling, keeping yourself up to date on not just technology, but what's happening in the industry, and look for other opportunities as well. Not don't just get locked into one specific area, and just assume it. I think this is kind of like a. I think it's a fear that was created by that study or report that OpenAI released about potential number of jobs. Oh, how did you arrive at that conclusion? Like, and this is my hot take. Exactly. You could potentially do it, assuming you have a whole bunch of things, ducks in a row. You have to have good data quality. You have to have a good system in place. You have to have good feedback loops. You have to have all these things in concert working together in order to make this sort of utopian nightmare of like um, occur, right? And and another thing that I find kind of like has been a common pattern with experts is experts know architecture. They can explain an application. They are not fortune tellers. So I have a lot of respect for Gregory Hinton and a lot of these people that are talking about some potential negative consequences. You should put controls, you should have regulation, but to assume that you are a fortune teller and that you know what's going to happen in the future, no one does, especially experts. And experts are notoriously bad at making, telling the future.
I was hearing, I think it was Google's employee who left Google, and then he was again creating this utopian nightmare that AI is going to go autonomous, and then it's going to go Sentinel, it's going to do this, going to do that. I
Yeah.
mean, like you said, that's assuming that all the humans are not doing anything, and and AI is left free to do whatever it wants.
But I mean,
So
not to be cynical, but I think people create problems and fear and then come in as saviors to say, hey, by the way, we have all the answers and we can help you out with this and all this stuff. So like, for example, OpenAI was talking about putting actual hardware locks, encryption locks on the features so that others can reverse engineer or something like that. Like they're setting the stage for this stuff.
yeah,
They're talking about it. Um, and they're creating these problems and this fear, I think, to come in
as
as the
saviors.
solution experts. So
Yeah. And it's exactly what I was watching one episode of Diary of CEO with Simon Sinek, and he was telling that there are these kind of people who what they do is if you're at ground zero and they want to lift you up, they'll take you to ground minus 100 and then
yeah,
lift you up, so that
yeah,
the delta seems much bigger now.
right. They break you down.
So
They can build you up. It's
exactly,
kind of like the army. They
exactly. And then this ties back with your human wisdom and psychology and those kind of things. Things are much more than they seem, with these big companies.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
I agree with you that everybody has to upskill. They have to embrace it. It's a technology. It's a tool. It's not something that's going to replace you. And I think there was a very famous meme that AI is not going to replace you. The guy using the AI will replace you.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty true. You should have, even in your role, that certain level of education. That how can AI impact your roles? For example, I went to one startup convention, and lots of companies were presenting their AI solutions, and one solution was for architects. They had designed an AI model that can make your architecture design much faster. Of course,
yeah,
you will still be the one guiding the tool, but if somebody now, if there are two graduates, one knows how to use that tool and the other doesn't, obviously the guy using the AI tool will have a bigger edge over the other person. And I think that's what is required. People should educate themselves and how to use this tool. And generative AI, I think it's one of the easiest tools to use, because it's just like interacting with another person. You're just conversing with them,
yeah.
and it's becoming.
There's a really great book called Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick. Definitely worth a read. And he talks about a lot of these sort of stuff that AI is sort of an intuitive based, human based interface. And one of the things that he talked about that I don't really have a clear answer on is the AI will probably impact those junior level positions,
Hmm.
and do stuff that can normally be done. And the more senior related, more advanced stuff will be covered by more advanced. Let's take developers for example, right? So those advanced developers will be doing more complicated stuff. Instead of having a full staff of junior developers, you'll have a smaller subset who are leveraging these tools like GitHub Copilot or Devin or what have you to do all this low level code. But the problem happens is that because because AI is handling this sort of a low level stuff, where do you learn this stuff to become more
Yeah,
advanced, right?
yeah,
That
yeah,
kind of a
exactly.
paradox. I'm not really sure how that's going to turn out, or how we're going to
Yeah,
approach it.
yeah, I think only time will tell. The most we can do is, whatever resources are out there, explore them. Like you said, don't get stuck in one specific place. Try out different things. I'm sure I think the biggest quality of human beings is survival. We're able to survive in any situation, if it's the North
Absolutely.
Pole or deserts or whatever. And I'm sure they can survive through this AI revolution as well. In fact, if it's used properly, this is going to be a big advantage for us rather than something that's going to replace us and something that we should be afraid of. Any closing remarks, Shiraz? We have discussed a lot of topics, and we can keep on discussing, but time is short. Any closing remarks that you would like to share with us?
So yeah, just in terms of future, closing remarks, I just want to talk about a few things about where I think the future of AI is going to go. So I think we're going to look at a lot of multimodal type of improvements. So you can see OpenAI doing that with not only images and text, but also real time. So they're able to actually see what's on your screen and work collaboratively like a human being would. So this has all kinds of applications, whether it's like a gaming coach for a video game, to somebody who's trying to help you become a better orator, or improve your presentations. Um, you're going to see that. You're probably going to see a lot more agents that are going to be involved. So things are going to run sort of autonomously. So you give them a sort of key instructions. So if you can imagine, like, let's say a social media campaign, those are different tasks that you would give to a person. And I think in the future, you're probably going to see those agents act like team members, and you'll be kind of guiding that process. And the other thing, there's some cutting edge studies that were done by Anthropic, is explainability. So that's the real big problem: is how do these sort of systems work? So I think explainability will be greatly improved by looking at specific techniques. And so what Anthropic had done was they took um, basically neural workings of a human brain and then map it onto how their Claude Sonnet system was working. And they were able to find various connections and actions. And so, I mean, it's just early stages, but I think we're going to see more of a progression to do that. And, that could kind of work both ways, right? If we can map out AI, then perhaps one day we can also map out the way humans think and
Exactly.
how they work. So I think
Yeah.
that's the future.
Yeah. We all would like to know how our wives think.
Absolutely.
No, I mean, absolutely, and the what you have outlined, I think, is something that we should always be reading up and learning more about, especially like agents. I remember seeing the presentation of Google Gemini where they said that, let's say you want to move from one state to another, an agent will go through all your connections, and it's going to change. For example, it's going to contact the postal system, change your addresses, do everything by its own, and of course that's going to make life much easier,
Yeah.
and then hopefully give us more time to do more innovative stuff and more novel stuff.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Shiraz. I think this discussion was very fruitful and very enlightening, and I'm sure we will have more discussions in the future as we more and more things about AI come to the stage. We'll discuss more about it. All the best with your new business, new venture, and thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, Adnan. Pleasure to be here.